Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Akron was a trap, disguised as a family meal. I'm Aurora Gibbs 30, and I walked into that suburban dining room expecting nothing more than awkward small talk. But the air was heavy like a storm about to break. My brother stood up, his smirk slicing through the tension. "You're not part of this family anymore," he declared, his voice cold and final. My mother's laugh cut deeper, her words sharp. "The sooner you're gone, the better." My little sister clapped her eyes, gleaming with approval, as if this was some twisted game they'd all agreed to play. My father just sat there silent, avoiding my gaze. My grandpa, the only one who ever saw me, looked at me with eyes full of sorrow, but he didn't speak. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. They were punishing me for saying no, refusing to pour $20,000 into my brother's latest coffee shop fantasy, another doomed idea in his string of failures. I'd had enough of their demands, their sneers, their endless need for my money. So I smiled, calm as ever, and said, "Then you don't need this." I slid a folder across the table, its weight landing like a gavel. My brother scoffed, thinking he'd outsmarted me, and tore it open. His face drained of color. His hands shook as he read, and then he let out a yell that froze the room. My mother's laugh died. My sister's hands stopped mid-clap. Whatever was in those pages hit them like a wrecking ball, and I knew they weren't ready for what came next. If you've ever been stabbed in the back by your own family, hit subscribe, and stay to see how I flipped their betrayal on its head. Before my brother stood up, I sensed the air turning sour. That Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Akron wasn't about catching up, it was an ambush. I'd driven over expecting the usual strained chatter, but the moment I walked in, I felt their eyes on me, sharp and calculating. My brother had been hounding me for weeks, pushing me to dump $20,000 into his latest coffee shop scheme, another flop waiting to happen. I'd said no flat out, and his calls turned icy, laced with talk about family loyalty. Sitting at that table, I knew he'd planned something ugly. He stood, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, declaring I was no longer part of the family. The word stung, but I'd seen it coming. My mother didn't hesitate. She laughed cold and mean, saying I'd be better off gone for good. My little sister, who I'd always protected, clapped like it was a performance, her face lit with a smug grin. My father just stared at his hands, silent as ever, letting it all unfold. My grandpa, the only one who'd ever cared, caught my gaze across the table. His eyes were heavy with grief, but he stayed quiet, too worn to challenge them. I wanted to scream, but I held it in, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the money. I'd been their bank for years, the one they ran to when things fell apart. As a software engineer, I made good money, and they saw that as their personal ATM. My mother would call with tales of a struggling mortgage, my father needed cash for house repairs, and my little sister's college tuition was always just a little short. I'd send wire transfers, write checks, whatever they needed, tens of thousands over time. But gratitude, never. Instead, they'd smirk when I showed up alone, no ring, no kids, like I was less than. My mother's favorite line was, "When are you going to get a real life?" My brother would chuckle, tossing out Miss Career Woman like a jab. The worst part was how they worshipped him. He was their golden boy, the one who could do no wrong even when his business ideas crashed and burned. A food truck that never opened a clothing line that tanked, and now this coffee shop nonsense. They still treated him like a genius. I was the one keeping their house out of foreclosure, but to them, I was just the sister who didn't measure up. My little sister followed their lead, soaking up their praise for him while rolling her eyes at me. My grandpa saw it all. He'd pull me aside after dinners, his voice low, telling me I didn't need their approval. "You're stronger than they know," he'd say, but he couldn't stop their demands. That night, my brother's declaration wasn't just about the coffee shop. It was revenge for me daring to say no, for refusing to play their game. My mother's laugh, my sister's applause, my father's silence. They were all part of it, a united front to put me in my place. They wanted me to feel worthless, like I didn't belong unless I opened my wallet. But I was done being their doormat. I'd come to that dinner ready, not with tears or anger, but with something they didn't expect. As they gloated, thinking they'd won, I knew I held the upper hand. The folder I'd brought wasn't just papers, it was my ticket out of their trap. This didn't start at that dinner table. For 5 years, I'd been the one holding my family together, or so I thought. As a software engineer in Akron, I had a steady income, and they knew it. My mother would call, her voice trembling, saying the mortgage was overdue again, begging for help to keep the house. I'd send thousands, $10,000 one year, $15,000 the next, because I couldn't let them lose their home. My father was quieter, but his requests came just as often: a leaking roof, a broken furnace, always something urgent. I'd wire the money, no questions asked, thinking it was my duty. My little sister, a college junior, needed tuition every semester. I covered it, $8,000 at a time, so she could chase her degree without loans. Over 5 years, it added up to $60,000, money I'd worked hard for, gone to keep them afloat. But my brother, he was the worst. He'd always been their favorite, the one they pinned their hopes on no matter how many times he failed. He called himself an entrepreneur, but his ideas, a food truck that never left the garage, a clothing brand that folded in months, were disasters. Each time he'd come to me promising this was the one, asking for thousands to get it off the ground. I'd given him money early on, hoping he'd turn things around, but it was like pouring water into a sieve. When I started saying no, he didn't argue, he just sneered, calling me the cash machine in emails to his buddies, thinking I'd never see them. I did. The rest of the family wasn't much better. They'd sit around at holidays, eyeing me like I owed them something, then make snide comments about my life. Still no boyfriend. My mother would say, her smile sharp, "You're too focused on work." My little sister would chime in, giggling, "Yeah, when's the wedding?" as if my single status was a punchline. My father never joined in, but he never stopped them either, just nodded along like it was normal. They acted like my career, my choices were some kind of flaw, because I wasn't chasing their version of a real life. Meanwhile, my brother could do no wrong, even when his latest venture left him broke again. My grandpa was the only one who saw me for me. After those tense family gatherings, he'd find me in the kitchen, his hands shaky but his voice firm. "You don't need to prove anything to them," he'd say. "Your heart's bigger than they deserve." He'd tell me stories of his own struggles, how he'd built a life without leaning on anyone, and I'd feel a flicker of pride. But he was old, his health failing, and he couldn't stand up to them anymore. I'd nod, thank him, and carry on, hoping one day they'd see my worth beyond my bank account. The truth was, I'd spent years trying to earn their love with every dollar I sent. I thought if I kept helping, they'd value me, not just my money. But it was never enough. My mother's calls grew sharper when I hesitated, my sister's gratitude turned to entitlement, and my brother's demands became ultimatums. By the time I refused his coffee shop scheme, I'd already given them everything: my savings, my energy, my patience. They didn't just want my help, they expected it, like I was born to serve them. My grandpa's words kept me going, but even he couldn't change how they saw me, a means to an end, nothing more. Looking back, I realized that dinner wasn't a sudden betrayal, it was the breaking point of years of their greed. They thought they could guilt me into submission like always. But I'd learned too much, seen too much. I wasn't the same person who'd written those checks without question. When I walked into that house, I wasn't just carrying a folder, I was carrying the weight of 5 years of their manipulation, ready to turn it back on them. When my brother opened the folder, the room went dead silent. His smug grin vanished as he flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, watching the color drain from his face. The folder wasn't just a stack of papers, it was a bomb. I'd carefully built, packed with proof of everything they'd tried to bury. I'd spent weeks gathering it, knowing this dinner was their final move to break me. Now it was my turn. The first page hit him hard as bank records showing $60,000 in transfers I'd made over 5 years. $10,000 to my mother for the mortgage in 2020, another $15,000 in 2022. $8,000 for my little sister's tuition semester after semester. $5,000 for my father's emergency repairs twice. Every dollar was there, time-stamped, undeniable, a ledger of their greed. My brother's eyes widened, but he kept flipping, and that's when he saw the emails. Messages he'd sent to his friends laughing, calling me the cash machine who'd pay up forever. I'd hacked into his old email account Child's Play for a software engineer and printed every word. His jaw clenched, but the worst was yet to come. The final blow was a set of bank statements, not mine, but his. They showed $10,000 his wife had given him for the coffee shop investment funneled straight into his personal account. Not a cent went to the business. He'd lied to her to all of them, pocketing the money for himself. He let out a yell, raw and panicked, slamming the folder shut. His wife, sitting beside him, snatched it from his hands. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking as she scanned the statements. Her eyes darted to him, betrayal sinking in. "You told me it was for the shop." My mother jumped in, her voice shrill. "This is a misunderstanding. He wouldn't do that." But her words faltered as his wife kept reading, her face hardening. My father stayed silent, his head bowed, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. My little sister, who'd been so quick to clap earlier, stared at the table, her hands fidgeting, caught off guard by the chaos. My grandpa's eyes met mine, a flicker of pride in them, but he didn't speak. The room was a pressure cooker, and I was the only one not sweating. I stayed calm, my voice even. "You wanted me out?" I said, looking at my brother. "So I thought you should see what you're losing." His wife's head snapped up, her glare burning into him. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You took my money." My mother tried again, stammering about family sticking together, but it was weak, desperate. My little sister mumbled something, her face flushed, but I didn't catch it. She was too shaken to make sense. My brother's hands gripped the table, his knuckles white. "You had no right," he spat, but his voice cracked, no match for the evidence staring him down. I didn't flinch. I'd spent years swallowing their insults, their demands, their betrayal. This wasn't just about money, it was about exposing the truth they'd hidden behind their fake smiles. My brother thought he could bully me into submission like always. My mother thought her guilt trips would keep me in line. My little sister thought she could ride their coattails and laugh at me. They were wrong. The folder was my line in the sand, proof that I wasn't their pawn anymore. As their voices rose, his wife's accusations, my mother's excuses, my brother's weak denials, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't done yet. The real fight was coming, and I was ready to end this on my terms. I stood up, my eyes locked on my brother. The room was still reeling from the folder's revelations, his lies, the $60,000 I'd given them, the money he'd siphoned from his wife. His face was pale, his hands clenched, but I wasn't here to watch him squirm. I was done playing their game. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single document, the final piece I'd prepared. "This," I said, my voice steady as I slid it across the table, "ends it." The paper was a notarized letter drafted with my lawyer's help, canceling the informal loan agreements I'd made with my parents. Over 5 years, I'd given them $25,000 for their mortgage, structured as loans they'd promised to repay, but never did. The document declared those debts null, no further payments expected from them or from me. I looked at my mother, then my father. "I'm done bailing you out," I said. "You're on your own now." My mother's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her usual excuses, her guilt trips, had no power here. My brother's wife, Tina, clutched the folder, her eyes darting between him and me. "You used me," she said, her voice low and sharp. "You took my savings and lied." "My brother Kyle." I'd stopped calling him anything else, stammered. "It's not like that, Tina. I swear." But she wasn't listening. She turned to me, her face a mix of anger and shame. "Did you know about this?" she asked. I shook my head. I found out when I dug for the truth. I'm as done with him as you are. My little sister Jenna sat frozen, her head bowed, hands twisted in her lap. She'd clapped so eagerly when Kyle tried to cast me out, but now she couldn't look at me. I remembered the $8,000 I'd sent for her tuition semester after semester, thinking it would help her soar. Her silence now felt like a blade sharper than my mother's laugh ever was. My father, Michael, kept his eyes on the table, his silence louder than any words. My grandpa, Edward, watched me, his gaze heavy with regret, like he wished he'd spoken up sooner. I gave him a small nod, a silent thank you for always seeing me. You thought you could push me out? I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. You thought I'd keep paying for your mistakes, your lies, your lives. Not anymore. I turned to Kyle. You don't get to call me a cash machine and then beg for more. You don't get to control me. His eyes flashed with anger, but he had no defense, not with his lies spread out for everyone to see. My mother tried one last time, her voice shaking. Aurora, we're family. You can't just walk away. I looked at her unflinching. You walked away from me first. I grabbed my coat and bag, my steps deliberate as I headed for the door. Tina's voice followed, still grilling Kyle, her words clipped and furious. Jenna whispered something, maybe my name, but I didn't stop. My father's silence hung heavy, and my mother's pleas faded into noise. Edward's eyes stayed on me, a mix of pride and sorrow, but he didn't move. The weight of their betrayal, their demands, their years of taking me for granted, it all fell away as I crossed the threshold. Outside, the Akron air was cold, but I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't carrying their burdens. I was free. As I drove away, my phone buzzed, probably my mother, maybe Jenna, already trying to pull me back. I didn't answer. I'd given them everything, but they'd given me nothing but expectations. That night, I wasn't just leaving their house. I was leaving their control, their judgment, their greed. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing: I was done being their pawn. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could breathe. A week later, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I'd left my parents' house in Akron with my head high, but they weren't done trying to pull me back. My mother, Joan, sent a long email, her words dripping with fake remorse. We didn't mean it. She wrote, claiming the dinner was a misunderstanding. Then came the real reason: the bank was hounding them for the mortgage again, and they needed $5,000 to cover it. No mention of the $25,000 I'd already given, now canceled by my lawyer's letter. I read her email once, my stomach twisting, then deleted it without replying. My father, Michael, texted next, a rare move for him. Can we talk? He wrote, short and vague, like he couldn't commit to an apology. I stared at the message, remembering his silence at the dinner table, how he'd let them tear into me without a word. My little sister Jenna sent a voicemail, her voice shaky. Aurora, I'm so sorry, she said, stumbling over her words. I didn't mean to hurt you, I got caught up. I thought of the $8,000 I'd paid for her tuition, how she'd clapped when Kyle tried to cast me out. Her regret came too late. I didn't call her back. The biggest fallout was with Kyle. His wife, Tina, had taken the folder's evidence to her bank, confirming he'd funneled her $10,000 into his personal account. She moved out the next day, filing for divorce within the week. I heard through a mutual friend that she'd rented an apartment downtown, refusing to speak to him. Kyle left me a message, his voice bitter. You ruined my life, he said, as if his lies weren't the cause. I blocked his number. He'd called me a cash machine for years, but now he was paying the price for his own greed. I needed a break from the chaos, so I met Carol, my best friend, at a quiet diner in Akron. She'd known my family's dysfunction for years, always urging me to pull away. Over coffee, I told her everything: the dinner, the folder, the confrontation. Her eyes lit up with pride. You finally stood up to them, she said, her voice firm. You've been carrying their weight too long. It's time to live for you. I nodded, feeling a warmth I hadn't in weeks. Carol wasn't family by blood, but she'd been more loyal than any of them. She reminded me I wasn't selfish for choosing myself, that I deserved a life free from their demands. My phone kept buzzing, more emails from Joan, another text from Michael, even a second voicemail from Jenna, her tone more desperate. "Please, Aurora, I need you," she said, hinting at her tuition bill coming due. I listened, my chest tight, but I didn't waver. I'd spent years giving them everything, money, time, hope, only to be mocked and used. Edward's face flashed in my mind, his regretful eyes at the dinner table, the only one who'd ever seen me. I wished I could talk to him, but I knew he'd urge me to forgive, and I wasn't ready for that. I blocked their numbers one by one, each tap on my screen feeling like a chain breaking. By the end of the week, I'd shut them out completely. No more calls, no more emails, no more guilt. The silence was deafening but freeing. I sat in my apartment staring at the life I'd built, my tech job, my small circle of friends like Carol, my own dreams that I'd put on hold for them. Their world was crumbling, Joan and Michael facing foreclosure, Jenna scrambling for loans, Kyle alone and broke. But I wasn't their savior anymore. For the first time, I felt the weight of their expectations lift. I wasn't just surviving their betrayal, I was building something new, something that was mine alone. 3 months later, I stood in my new apartment in Seattle. The city's skyline sparkled through the window, a far cry from Akron's quiet streets. I'd taken a senior software engineer job at a tech startup, a leap I'd dreamed of but never dared until now. The move was a fresh start, a chance to build a life that wasn't tethered to my family's demands. My apartment was small, but mine, clean lines, a desk for coding, a view that reminded me every day I'd chosen myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living, not just surviving. My phone had been silent since I blocked their numbers, but my inbox told a different story. Joan sent an email a month after I left, her tone softer but still laced with manipulation. "We're struggling," she wrote, hinting at another mortgage crisis, as if I hadn't already given them $25,000. She mentioned family healing, but I saw through it, no real apology, just another plea for cash. I deleted it without a second thought, my fingers steady on the keyboard. A week later, a letter arrived from Edward, his handwriting shaky but warm. "I'm proud of you," he wrote, urging me to keep moving forward, but also asking if I'd consider talking to Joan. My heart ached. He'd always been my anchor, but I tucked the letter away unanswered. I wasn't ready to reopen that door. Seattle was everything Akron wasn't. I spent weekends exploring Pike Place Market, sipping coffee that didn't come from Kyle's failed schemes. My new colleagues were sharp-driven and didn't care about my personal life. They valued my work, not my wallet. I joined a hiking group, something I'd never had time for when I was sending checks to my parents or Jenna. The trails, the rain, the city's hum, it all felt like a gift I'd denied myself for too long. Carol texted regularly, cheering me on from Akron. "You're killing it," she'd write, and I'd smile, grateful for a friend who saw me as more than a means to an end. I didn't hear from Kyle, Jenna, or Michael, and I didn't seek them out. A mutual friend mentioned that Joan and Michael's house was in foreclosure, and Jenna had taken out loans for college. Kyle was living alone, his divorce finalized, his latest business a bust. Their struggles tugged at me for a moment, a reflex from years of being their safety net. But I let it pass. I'd given them $60,000, years of my energy, and they'd given me nothing but judgment. I wasn't responsible for their choices anymore. Looking back, I realized how much I'd carried for them: guilt for saying no, fear of being selfish, hope that they'd love me if I gave enough. That dinner in Akron wasn't just a fight, it was the moment I saw the truth. They didn't value me, they valued what I could provide. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Setting boundaries wasn't about punishing them, it was about protecting myself. Choosing my own path. My career, my city, my peace didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering about Edward, the only one who'd ever truly cared. I kept his letter on my desk, a reminder of his quiet strength, but I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe one day when the hurt wasn't so raw, I'd reach out. For now, I was focused on building a life that was mine. I'd spent too long trying to fix theirs, thinking it would earn me a place in their world. But I didn't need their world anymore. I had my own. As I stood in my apartment watching Seattle's lights flicker, I felt a quiet power. I'd walked through their fire, Kyle's lies, Joan's guilt trips, Jenna's betrayal, Michael's silence, and come out stronger. The lesson wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It was about knowing my worth, about refusing to let their expectations define me. I wasn't the cash machine or the selfish sister. I was Aurora, and I was enough. That was the freedom I'd fought for, the life I'd earned, one boundary at a time. 6 months later, I shared my story online. From my Seattle apartment, I posted a video on a platform where strangers became a kind of community, spilling everything: my family's betrayal, the folder, the moment I walked away. I didn't expect much, just a way to process it all, but the response floored me. Messages poured in from people who'd faced similar battles, parents who demanded too much, siblings who took without giving. "You're so brave," one comment read. Another said, "I cut off my family too, and it saved me." My inbox overflowed with support, and for the first time, I felt like my choice wasn't just right, it was understood. Seattle had become my home. My job at the tech startup was demanding but rewarding, with late nights, coding turning into breakthroughs that made me proud. I'd upgraded my apartment to a bigger one with a balcony where I'd sip coffee and watch ferries glide across Puget Sound. My hiking group had become a second family, swapping stories on trails through the Cascades. Carol visited once, her laughter filling my new space as we cooked dinner together. "This is you now," she said, raising a glass, her eyes gleaming with pride. I smiled, knowing she'd been right all along. Living for myself wasn't selfish, it was survival. I didn't reach out to my family, but snippets of their lives trickled in through old acquaintances. Kyle had lost his marketing job. His reputation, tarnished after Tina's divorce, made his lies public. He was scraping by, renting a cheap apartment in Akron, his entrepreneur dreams dead. Joan and Michael had sold their house, unable to keep up with the mortgage after I'd stopped covering their debts. They'd moved into a cramped rental, their pride as broken as their finances. Jenna was struggling with her college tuition, working 2 part-time jobs to cover what loans couldn't. I felt a pang hearing about her, remembering the semesters I'd funded, but I pushed it aside. Her choices, siding with Kyle, mocking me, had consequences just like theirs did. I didn't gloat over their struggles. Their downfall wasn't my victory. My freedom was. Every day in Seattle, I built a life that was mine: new friends, a promotion on the horizon, plans for a solo trip to Europe. I'd spent years tying my worth to their approval, thinking I owed them my money, my time, my heart. But that night in Akron, when I laid out the truth and walked away, I reclaimed it all. Their chaos, Kyle's greed, Joan's guilt trips, Michael's silence. Jenna's betrayal was theirs to carry, now not mine. Sharing my story online wasn't just about venting. It was a way to connect, to find others who'd drawn their own lines. The comments kept coming, stories of people setting boundaries, cutting ties, choosing themselves. One woman wrote about leaving her toxic parents behind. A man shared how he stopped funding his brother's endless schemes. Their words mirrored my own journey, and I realized I wasn't alone. I ended my video with a question, my voice steady but curious. Have you ever set boundaries with family? Was I right? I wanted to know, needed to know if others saw what I did, if they'd found peace on the other side of letting go. As the responses rolled in, I felt a quiet strength. I wasn't the cash machine Kyle had mocked, or the selfish daughter Joan had painted me to be. I was Aurora Gibbs, a woman who'd fought for her own life and won. I thought of Edward, his letter still on my desk, his pride, the one thing I carried from my old world. Maybe one day I'd write back when the scars weren't so fresh. For now, I was done looking back. Seattle's skyline glowed outside my window, a reminder of everything I'd gained. I had no regrets, not for the folder, not for walking away, not for choosing me. I was free, and that was enough.